Let's start. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're dialing in from. My name is Deborah Keller, and I manage the Global Impact for Breakfast Network, an initiative supported by Artha Impact, the impact investing arm of the Rianta Capital Family Office. This specialized group has been gathering and growing since 2008, starting in London with an expansion today to 23 chapters around the globe. Our informal network counts 2,700 members who are meeting virtually and at in-person gatherings in the local chapters. Impact for Breakfast is an informal network of family offices, foundations, funds, venture philanthropy, and intermediary organizations with a common focus on social enterprise, entrepreneurship, and impact investing. Those who are here for the first time and wish to learn more about the network, you are welcome to visit impactforbreakfast.com. I will share the link to our site in the chat field shortly. In today's session, we will talk about how social enterprises are scaling cost-effective, impactful rural transport solutions and driving systems change in emerging markets. 1 billion rural people worldwide, including 70% of the rural population of sub-Saharan Africa, live in communities where basic transportation is often inaccessible, unavailable, and expensive. People in these communities rely primarily on walking, which often puts school, healthcare, markets, and critical services needed to end poverty hours away, and essentially out of reach. Governments often underinvest in rural access, yet it is an essential ingredient to help those living in poverty to create thriving communities. Social enterprises World Bicycle Relief and Bridges to Prosperity will share evidence that their connectivity solutions create transformational impact and speak to potential for scaling those solutions. They will discuss a new movement for system change that partner them with communities, governments, funders, and NGOs to mainstream rural access in support of the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and a prosperous future for all. Now let me introduce you to our wonderful speaker group today. We have with us Dave Neesvander, Chief Executive Officer of World Bicycle Relief. We have Nivi Sharma, CEO of Bridges to Prosperity, and Christina Barstow, Chief Strategy Officer of Bridges to Prosperity. Before we dive into today's topic, I want to inform you that this session is being recorded. We will share the link to the recording with you after in a follow-up note, which you're welcome to pass along to your network or to your colleagues. After the introduction into the topic and the presentations, we will move over to a Q&A and discussion round. I want to remind you that this is an informal network, so please share your thoughts, comments, ideas, anything that you'd like to share with us. We'd love to hear it. If you can think of a question for one of our speakers during the presentation, just type it in the chat field showing on your screen, and we'll do our best to cover them all during the Q&A slot. And now, with no further ado, over to you, Dave. I will play a short video. Let's see. One moment. Now it's coming.
Every morning, the pulse of life begins in Palabana. We work early to prepare for school. We milk our cows, we open shop. But out here, there are no school buses, no paved roads, no highways. In remote towns around the world, distance is a barrier, time an enemy. But Palabana is a community on the move. Here we have bicycles, strong, reliable bicycles. Mary used to rise before the sun and walk 5 miles to school. Now she pedals. Mary dreams of becoming a nurse. Joel travels 50 miles to purchase steel. With his bicycle, he can carry 220 pounds. Joel literally strengthens his community. Georgina is a 68-year-old dairy farmer. With a bicycle, her farm delivers twice as much milk to the dairy co-op 8 miles away. Out here, bicycles build connections between students and their dreams, craftsmen and their customers, farmers and their futures.
I provide fresh milk.
I help my family.
I treat the sick.
I grow my business.
I ride to school. I carry water.
I care for the children.
We are Palabana.
We are Palabana.
We are Palabana, and we are on the move.
Dave, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Deborah. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Dave Nicewonder. I'm the Global CEO for World Bicycle Relief. I've been with the organization now 15 years, including 10 years on the ground in Zambia, near Palabana, and also South Africa. I must admit to this group that I am a reformed investment banker. Prior to joining World Bicycle Relief, I was 15 years at a regional investment bank in the Washington, D.C. area. So happy to further on conversations on that. To get started, I sort of want to frame sort of the issues and the challenges. You know, we all take for granted the daily transportation options available to us. We have our cars, we have trains, we have bike shares, we even have electric scooters. But nearly 1 billion people around the world, including 450 million in rural Africa, they don't have these options. They live in communities like Palabana, far from paved roads, far from economic centers, and primarily rely on walking. As Deborah said, that often puts schools and basic healthcare, markets, and other critical services needed to end poverty hours away and mostly out of reach. The majority of sub-Saharan Africa population lives in rural areas, but we find that much of the development resources that are directed to urban areas. Too often this means that rural people are untouched by many of the transformational investments and innovations that are going into development. We find that a lack of accessibility is one of the main drivers of continued poverty in rural developing communities. Rural families and communities lag behind on nearly every single measure of health, economic opportunity, education, and empowerment. In fact, 4 out of every 5 people living below the poverty line live in rural areas. They live without access to high-tech seeds or fertilizers, limited access to medicine, and often very far away from even basic education. So what does rural isolation look like for a farmer? You know, nearly 50% of African farmers live 5 hours or more from markets, which often forces them to sell at lower prices, and also reduce their access to valuable inputs and training on best practices. You know, think about it. If I don't have reliable transportation or access to better markets, I'm forced to sell my produce locally on the side of the road and at bottom prices. For education, across the geographies where World Bicycle Relief operates, over 40% of our students, some as young as 7 years old, must walk at least 5 kilometers one way to school. That means oftentimes they leave home in the morning while it's still dark, they return home in the dark, and they are often late to school and return home late, which leaves little time for studying. This distance barrier has contributed to more than 300,000 children in Zambia who are out of school. And due to COVID, this crisis has even deepened. And Zambia is not an outlier. Across Africa, an estimated 33 million primary school-aged children are not currently enrolled in school. And according to the World Bank, the single most important determinant to primary school enrollment is distance. Rural exclusion can also be life-threatening. The nearest health clinic in Zambia is typically 8-kilometer walk away. 8 kilometers or 5 miles is a world away when you're sick or injured, when you're in labor, or when you're carrying your sick child. It is little wonder that rural Zambian women are twice as likely to die in pregnancy and childbirth than urban women. Across rural sub-Saharan Africa, 70% of deaths are related to distance. Patients simply can't reach health facilities or can't reach them in time. In rural areas in Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, and beyond, dedicated students, caring parents, and hardworking communities are really cursed by this rural exclusion and distance. They're unable to access services and opportunities. To go a little deeper, I'd like to focus a moment on the gender inequality of rural isolation. Because distances build on each other, rural women and girls are disproportionately impacted. For example, they walk a long walk to fetch water, made even longer by climate change. It's simply not an inconvenience for girls, who are traditionally the ones who fetch in rural communities. It can jeopardize the girls' ability to make that long walk to school because they simply run out of daylight. And the long walk of schoolgirls not only leaves them more vulnerable to harassment and assault, but can deepen their family's poverty, because it can mean that the girls can't help on the family farm or can't help ends meet before or after school. There's a major opportunity for the development community and governments to adequately capture the required investments for rural communities. We need to stop building schools without a thought to how rural children will get there. And we need to stop building health clinics without considering how rural patients can access life-saving care. Development funders and governments must integrate rural access into policies and programs with proven business models that are scalable and respond to local communities' needs, particularly those at the bottom of the economic pyramid. We know exactly how to improve rural access. This actually is my organization's North Star. Since we were established in 2005, World Bicycle Relief has delivered more than 660,000 purpose-designed bicycles to connect rural people to the opportunities and services they need to thrive through low-cost, sustainable programming and a supportive bicycle ecosystem. We do this in 2 ways. Our nonprofit arm partners with organizations, governments, and importantly, communities to assess rural mobility needs, develop community-led supportive programming, and strategically distribute our Buffalo bicycles. And most importantly, we measure the impact. And the evidence of that impact is clear. Access to bicycle transports helps community health workers in Kenya serve 88% more patients. In Zambia, the bicycle helps dairy farmers increase their income by 25%. With bicycles, girls get to school with improved attendance and test scores while reducing their dropout rate by 19%. We also operate our wholly owned for-profit social enterprise, Buffalo Bicycles, which sells bicycles and spares to development organizations and to consumers through our retail network of 60 Buffalo bicycle shops supplying bicycles and spares. In fact, 60% of our 660,000 bicycles that we've distributed to date have been sold through our social enterprise. This market approach leverages our impact and supports the sustainability of our programs. With our focus on meeting the end user's needs, our for-profit social enterprise has more than doubled in the past 5 years to achieve $11 million in revenue this past year, and we conservatively project a 12% compounded annual growth rate over the next 5 years. To wrap up my comments, I would say that the world will not achieve a single one of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals if we do not address rural exclusion. Although rural mobility cuts across most of the SDGs, it is not explicitly part of any of them. Despite its pervasive impact, rural access and transportation is perhaps the most overlooked issue in the global development agenda. Bicycles can serve as a strategic accelerator that can help governments deliver critical services and more individuals and communities on the pathway out of poverty. WBR wants to reach 1 million bicycles in total delivered in the next several years. That's great, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to the global need. How do we do this? How do we address this issue? Part of our mission is to raise awareness, how to inspire and influence peers and competitors to address the urgent need for affordable, reliable transport for the rural population, to end rural exclusion. The opportunity is vast. System change is needed to address this at scale. We must make this change by encouraging governments and partners to embed rural access and transportation into every investment and every program design of health, education, and economic growth programs. We simply can't leave behind the 1 billion that are living in this rural isolation. Thanks so much. Over to you, Nivi.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you so much, Dave. Hello from Nairobi, Kenya, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Interesting fact, Kenya just got a new president today, in case you didn't know. So that's the excitement on our end of the world. So Dave, you've done such a wonderful job of outlining the problem of rural access. Thank you so much. And you're absolutely right in that this is an internal conversation we have at B2P so often, which is that rural access just simply needs to be elevated on the development and on the research agendas. I'm going to get some slides brought up soon. Christina, are you able to share? Thank you. And so my name is Nivi. I'm the CEO at B2P, and after me, the Chief Strategy Officer of B2P, my colleague Christina Barstow, will be speaking. So we know that a lack of rural connectivity is devastating. This came into stark relief for me a few weeks ago when I attended the inauguration of the Gachumbi Bridge in Rwanda, in rural Rwanda. And I met a woman who, said that most days her kids go to school, but there were days when it would rain and she would wake up, and I don't know about you guys, but before I have a cup of coffee, I can't even bring myself to write an email. But this woman was making decisions about whether her girls would go to school that day or not, because she wasn't sure whether they'd get back safely enough. And apparently she was okay with risking the lives of her boys. But, it really brought home to me that, no mother should have to make a decision like that, especially first thing in the morning. It's stories like this that really have powered us forward at B2P. And to achieve our vision of a world where isolation caused poverty no longer exists. Since we were founded in 2001, Bridges to Prosperity has constructed more than 400 trail bridges and connected about 1.5 million people worldwide. And we say trail bridges, not foot bridges, because other than feet, there are bicycle wheels, motorbike wheels, and hooves that often cross our bridges. Our B2P bridges are carefully designed to be built in remote environments, largely without heavy construction materials and machinery, and they're utilized, and we utilize locally sourced or repurposed materials. Our bridges are lean, they're transformative to the communities that we build for, and they're pretty beautiful too. And studies show that trail bridges act like insurance more than anything else. When a family living in the world's rural farmlands can be confident that they'll be able to cross a river or a gorge, they make decisions differently. They send their children, in particular their daughters, to school every day and on time. They access preventative healthcare or set out on the walk to the clinic or hospital in moments of emergency. They plant higher yielding crops or take off-market employment, knowing that they will be able to reach the market or whatever job they manage to secure, no matter what the weather is. These shifts in behavior add up to about 75% higher farm profits, 30% higher household incomes. And I'm really proud of how data-driven we are at B2P and the amount of research we do on the impact that we have. And a lot of it is independently studied research. So this kind of opportunities break the cycles of generational poverty and transforms the future for entire communities. And it's such a simple intervention, just one simple bridge, a trail bridge, a footbridge, whatever you call it, and you can see it during inauguration day of these communities and their eyes lighting up and that their lives have changed forever now. To be isolated, rurally isolated, is a really difficult thing to wrap your head around as we sit in rooms in the way that we're sitting. We know that we've got an invaluable development tool here in trail bridges, and we aren't content to chip away at this problem one bridge at a time. Although we are we have been building about 50 bridges a year. But that's not going to be enough. One bridge at a time, one community at a time isn't going to solve the problem. We realize that we need to build a groundswell to recruit others to the cause and to really elevate this problem on the development and research agendas. And to do that, we need to work alongside and in partnership with other organizations who are active in the rural access space. And we need to raise awareness and catalyze investment in rural roads, bridges, and bicycles. And for that, I'm going to hand off to my colleague, Dr. Christina Barstow, to tell you a little bit more about our approach to building partnerships and working with other partners in the space. Thank you.
Thanks, Divi. I would love to, before I start, I'd love to show a short video, Deborah, if you wouldn't mind, from Bridges to Prosperity. Great, thanks. So my name is Christina Barstow, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Bridges to Prosperity. But today I'm really going to be representing kind of the larger rural access sector, and that's really what I want to talk to you about, which is this: how do we create this movement towards rural access? And I think Nivi and Dave really set this up really well, and I think you can kind of see the similarities between what Bridges to Prosperity does, building bridges every day, and what World Bicycle Relief does, providing access through bicycles in rural areas. And so when we started thinking about this at Bridges to Prosperity, we thought, okay, we need to progress this mission towards scale, as Nivi mentioned. And also with talking to folks like World Bicycle Relief, we're saying, oh my gosh, we have the same exact mission and vision and how to get there. And that's through this optimization of resources across our organizations. So we started with this idea of how do we kind of leverage each other's organizations with similar missions and visions, and with World Bicycle Relief and other organizations such as Helvetas, we came together on this idea of building a global coalition around rural access. And the name of that coalition is the Rural Opportunities for Universal Transportation Equity, and that is also ROUT or ROOT, depending on how you pronounce it. And there will be a quiz later today on that again. But that is this global coalition that we've started in order to build momentum towards rural access.
Right now, I'm in Arua. I'll be joining online, and the link is.
Thanks. So when we were building out this coalition, one of the things we were thinking about was what are the gaps that need to be filled in order to think about this coalition from a larger scale. So we started kind of a years-long process of really digging into how do we build a coalition around rural access and what are the gaps that this coalition could fill. A few things really came up during that process. The first thing was that there's a lack of this quantification of need. So we've kind of heard some rough statistics about 1 billion people being isolated, but where is the need? Where are bridges needed? Where are bicycles needed? This kind of definition and quantification is really unclear in the global sector. More cross-sector linkages. So we think about maybe rural transportation as a sector, but what rural transportation is really doing is connecting people to health centers, education centers, markets. That's kind of Dave was describing earlier. And so we really aren't seeing these sectors come together and seeing themselves as one large rural access sector. Third is unlocking financing and resources. There is a lack of resources being driven into the rural sector. Again, Dave mentioned that a lot of those resources are going into urban areas, and we're seeing less focus on the rural financing and resources. Fourth, both Dave and Nivi mentioned impact and evidence. This is hugely important. There's both a lack of evidence in this sector as far as studies that have been conducted, but also contextualized evidence. So, really showing what this evidence is and translating it to all of the audiences, all the audiences involved. Finally, one of the big gaps was advisory services for governments. So if you want to start a rural access program, what are the private sector institutions that can build that infrastructure? Who are the vocational schools that we need to build up in order for governments to be able to prioritize rural access? So the vision and the goal of the Route Coalition was really to coalesce this group of organizations and influencers with this aim to build momentum to end rural isolation. Also, we wanted to really propel both kind of first mile and last mile transport to scale by heightening the links between these different organizations in order to end poverty alleviation and other development outcomes so that a broad set of actors are engaged to unlock finance, strengthen capacity, institutions, and policies. So how is the Route Coalition going to do this? The first thing is that unlocking finance piece. So Route really is looking at funder roundtables, focus groups, and mapping of these funding streams that are available for rural access and able to do reflections on and piloting of these financial instruments and incentives to attract finance further to the sector. Second, advocacy. We've heard a lot about just the need for greater awareness of the rural access sector and this need that exists. So we're really looking to do advocacy efforts around country-specific packaging of total need, the financing gap, and impact opportunity, the translation of that academic evidence to audiences, as I mentioned before, and the facilitation of support to bring these actors together in specific countries and contexts. As it relates to those advisory services, the coalition is looking to bring technical tools for capacity building. These could be things like guidance manuals, standards, different things that governments need in order to bolster their rural access sector. Evidence generation and collection and dissemination. So again, creation of a learning agenda for the sector, creating evidence and translating it to our partners. And finally, those cross-sector connections. I can't stress this enough. We need to elevate the impact of rural transport across different sectors, creating champions for rural transport in water, in health, in agriculture, across the full rank of rural access. And so just to give you a quick update on kind of where we are with Route, this coalition has just launched this past year. We are now looking to drive membership and get it up and running. We are currently hiring a new director, or hiring our inaugural Route director, and finalizing our 3-year strategy and membership structure. I think, as you have probably realized, in forming this coalition, it involves people's opinions really matter. We need members to reach out to us and say, this is what I'm seeing in the rural access sector. Here's how my organization can help. Here's how we can, here's how we see need. Here's how we see impact. So please do reach out to the email here about at bridgestoprosperity.org. This coalition is really about keeping this conversation going, and it's really important that we talk to folks to do that. So thanks again for your time. We're interested in any questions about the coalition.
Thank you very much, Christina, Dave, and Nidhi, for those insights shared and sharing the need for change there. We will move over to questions and discussion round. So if you have a question to share with our speakers, you're welcome to unmute yourself and speak directly to our speakers. I saw that there is a question from Perry in the chat box, who asked about cargo bikes or cargo trike. So he's asking, given how many bicycles are used for transporting goods, will there be a cargo trike coming to the market? That's a question for you, Dave.
Sure. No, it's a great question. And I think our organization abides by the motto, all answers are found in the field, right? And so some of the history of our organization is we were founded as part of SRAM organization. SRAM's the world's second largest bicycle component manufacturer, making very high-end bicycle components. So we take that product development from the very top end of the industry and apply that to the bottom of the economic pyramid in these developing regions. And that is our core value proposition. What we have found is that people want a sturdy horse. And so when we think about the bicycle, we think about, how we can make that the strongest horse. Now, the cart that goes onto that horse can be locally manufactured and fabricated, but if we focus on that horse and the capability, and our rear carrier does hold over 100 kg, and we've certainly seen more than that on that carrier to be on there. So right now, we think we have the strongest bicycle that's available, and other people have added on different carts. We've worked with maternity programs where they've done ambulances that have attached to the back of the bicycle. So there's lots of things that you can do that, but we focus on making the strongest horse or strongest bicycle we can.
Thank you, Dave. If you have a question, you can unmute yourself, turn on your camera, make yourself visible, raise your hand, or if you can't speak, you can also throw your question into the chat box so I can read it out loud to our speakers. I have a question for you, Christina. You said you just launched that coalition. Are there many organizations out there, competitors that are willing to collaborate on that coalition? Do you see interest coming in?
Thanks, Deborah. Yeah, during the kind of formation of the Route Coalition, we interviewed many dozen organizations, from foundations to NGOs to governments to institutional finance developers. And so what we saw was a lot of interest. Right now in this kind of startup phase, we're developing that membership criteria, how to get involved, what that all looks like. But basically what we've seen is a huge need and a huge interest in this. I think how that ends up coming together across all of those different actors is still to be completely seen with a new director coming in. But we were extremely excited about the amount of excitement and just vocal need for this type of coalition that exists, that doesn't currently exist in the sector. So that's kind of where we are right now, and looking forward to kind of stay tuned. And again, if anybody is hearing that and it's resonating with them as far as this need for systems change through coalition building, please do reach out to us, and we'd love to kind of have you on both our email list, but also just, would really love to have a conversation with how you're contributing to the sector, how we can work together, and also connect you to a lot of those other organizations that we're currently working with. Like, for example, people coming to me and saying, we're in these contexts where bicycles are needed. And we now are really, really close with World Bicycle Relief and can send people that way. So yeah, please do connect on that level.
Thank you, Christina. I'm not sure who was first. Chiara and Mava are raising their hands. I see also Grant. Mava, why don't you go first?
I go first?
Yes, please do.
Yes, thank you. I'm called Mimawa. I'm a refugee in Uganda, Bidibidi Refugee Settlement. I'm a co-founder and managing director, senior locator. My question is about to the innovation. It is very amazing innovation. I want to know how sustainable is this bridge? What I see it is hanging, and how strong is it to the community? Thank you.
In terms of sustainability, we use a lot of repurposed material. For example, the cables on our bridges are donated to us from shipping ports. And so they can't be used after 3 years of lifting heavy cargo, but then they last on our bridges for the estimated time is about 30 to 50 years. We used to have wooden decks on our bridge, and I think those are some of the pictures you might have seen in the presentation. And those don't last as long as what we have shifted to about 5 years ago, which is steel decking. And again, that has a really long lifespan. Often, even myself as the leader of the organization, I go to bridges and I think, this bridge is really over-engineered for the setting that it's in. But we always build, with climate change in mind, and, these bridges are built to be climate resistant, to be prepared for, the few days of a year when there is flooding. And of course, like many years down the line when the water levels will be higher along those banks.
Yeah, thank you.
Chiara, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for sharing. This is really insightful. I'm curious to hear from kind of all the organizations. How are you including locals in the process of both planning and kind of implementing these projects, especially for the longer term sustainability? Because I know that when locals are kind of included in the vision as well as the execution of a process, it makes it a lot more successful. And along those lines, kind of how are maybe sort of traditional thoughts of that community or traditions and like local materials included in what projects you're working on?
I can go first, Dave. I know Dave's answer to this question is super interesting too. But, when we build bridges and we do our needs assessment of where a bridge is needed, we're not innovating here. We're relying on generational knowledge of where people want to cross and try to cross and have risked their lives crossing because of what's on the other side of that river or that gorge, and the fact that there isn't a better alternative. So, of course, we use local knowledge in gathering where we should build our bridges in our needs assessment. We work with local government very closely to build all our bridges. And then every single bridge of ours, all the labor comes from the community. And it's really touching. Last time I was at a construction site at a bridge, one of the construction workers pulled me aside and he'd said that he had lost his fiancée across that bridge. And I thought it was quite romantic that he was part of building the solution where, more people wouldn't have to die in risking their lives in crossing that river. So the community workers are very much integral to building the bridge, even though we bring our project engineers and masons and so on. But a lot of our engineers and masons have also been recruited from the communities that where we've built bridges. So it's a really good question. It's a really important question, Chiara, as we move forward, thinking about what happens when we stop building bridges and we hand over this ability to build bridges to partners, whether that's private sector, government, other development agencies. And, we hold these community members so tightly and integrally to the way in which we work and what we do. And it scares us that, what if the partners that we bring on board who build more bridges achieve the end goal of building more bridges, but they don't do it in the way that we do with hand in hand in communities. So That's something that we worry about, but we really hope that we'll be able to translate the benefits of working with community in doing so.
Thanks, Ivy. Really helpful. From World Bicycle League's perspective, we implement programs called Mobilized Communities. And the important part of that is that it's very much community-led, starting from a mobility needs assessment, where we engage with the traditional leaders, the civic leaders, teachers, the local district or community health and security, wildlife. And so they form what's called a bicycle supervisory committee. These are a lot of times existing committees that are in the community to determine where the transportation needs are. And they're the ones that determine who receives bicycles and then the monitoring the usage of the bicycles over time. In the mobilized communities, we look to commit to a community for about 5 years and do about 13 to 15,000 bicycles, but the recipients are determined at the community level, and that engagement with traditional leadership is most important. So we leverage the existing committees and community programs that are already in place, and really in a partnership with those communities over a long period of time.
Thank you, Dave and Ivy. Chiara has a follow-up question, whether community workers are compensated or is it volunteer work that they're doing?
For us, it's volunteer work. It's usually existing committees that are already in place that were part of the tradition of that community.
I've just answered in the chat. Our community members are definitely paid. And that's part of the government contribution as well towards paying laborers to build infrastructure as they usually would. But there is usually a bridge maintenance community that volunteers and forms a committee and doesn't volunteer resources in terms of wire or steel to maintain a bridge, which is what's needed sometimes. But at least they do the coordination with the local government and district governments to say, hey, this is needed, this is falling apart, this has been vandalized, or whatever's needed a few years down the line.
Yeah, I would also add, I mean, part of our sustainability is of training of field mechanics. So we've trained over 2,700 bicycle field mechanics in the communities where we operate. Those mechanics we bring in for training, provide tools, access, and then they are compensated by the community at the local level. So we provide the training and also provide the bicycles that then the communities own, but then are serviced by those local field mechanics as part of the sustainability of the program.
Thank you.
I would just add one thing about kind of community resources as it relates to these projects. I think one of the big things that Route looked at and we've heard a lot about was when should you be fully leveraging the community and when is it the government's responsibility? And that's something that we really think about when we think about advisory services. For the instances of bridges, Nivi was saying small things definitely can be fixed by a bridge committee. That's where it's useful in the community. But if there's larger things that need to be maintained in any infrastructure, a lot of that is the government's responsibility. And so through advisory services, we can really say, okay, this is something that we can train the community to do well. And here's a place where we really need to advocate for the government to take responsibility. And so I think there's a real kind of thoughtfulness in how those programs are designed. And again, really important conversations with all of those stakeholders in order to develop the kind of right maintenance plan or the right community outreach plan.
Thank you. Ali, I see your hand raising. Please go ahead.
Yes. So some of this have been answered before, but the issue of bicycles cost. Now there is a cost of acquisition, and I think I've heard Dave says that they are distributed, but then there is also a cost of maintenance and repairs. Now the other issue is the issue of the penetration level, or you don't want to create the polarization of the people who have bicycles and people who do not have the bicycles. So that's one issue. The other issue with the bridges is that who pays for the repairs? I mean, fine, you get a donation, you install a bridge, but a bridge to sort of, it needs maintenance, it needs people who would inspect it on a regular basis to ensure safety and repairs. My interest is in the cost. Who bears this cost? Thank you.
Maybe I'll kick that off. Ali, thank you so much. It's a great question. You know, as it relates to the concentration of bicycles, so we're very intentional as we go into a community that we want to have a concentration. We do not want to have the haves and the have-nots. And that's why being community-led is so important, because basically what they do is think about what are the distances that are required, and almost, if you look at a school, do concentric circles and who was walking the farthest to have to attend school, and those are prioritized. We also do a priority of 70% to girl students. So having an open, inclusive, transparent process in the bicycle supervisory committee of who's receiving the bicycles, and then also making sure that you have a concentration. If you have, say, an attendance or an enrollment of 400 students, we'll typically bring in 150, 175 bicycles to be able to address those that live furthest away, at least 3 kilometers or more away from the school. So being transparent as far as what the needs are, and also making sure that we have gender inclusion is part of the process. As it relates to the price, and we are very thoughtful as it relates to the design of the bicycle. We could have designed a bicycle that was $300, $400, $500. That would be very awesome, be a great bike. But nobody could afford it, and nobody could afford to repair it. So really thinking about how we can have the strongest bicycle that's affordable. Our bicycle is about $200 retail price through one of our Buffalo bicycle retail shops. What we're working on is how that price point is about 2 times the cost of a bicycle shaped object. Which is a bicycle that you might find in the rural areas that really doesn't function. Wheels collapse, pedals snap off, brakes don't work. So having that value proposition of a quality bicycle that is affordable, one of the things that we're working on and look for partnership on is financial inclusion. How can we provide credit to consumers and individuals and communities to pay for the bicycle over time? We've had great examples working with dairy cooperatives, with security firms, with flower farms. But the real question is, how do you get from the informal economy, financial inclusion, and access to credit for bicycles? So we're very thoughtful as it relates to having the readily available supply chain of bicycles and spare parts to promote that sustainability. Hopefully that helped answer some of your question.
On the kind of Bridges to Prosperity side, we think about, this kind of comes back to my last comment, which is really about what is kind of community driven versus what is government driven, especially in the long term as it relates to maintenance. I mean, I think the first thing to mention about bridges is, as far as kind of a intervention goes, these do last decades. That is I think one of the most beautiful thing about these bridges in particular is, in my career, this is the only intervention I've really worked on where I can say that a bridge will last decades, and we actually don't even know the lifespan of most of our bridges because the materials are so robust. But again, as it relates to kind of some of that smaller maintenance things that need to be done, we do need to make sure that those are integrated into government structures. In an intervention that's going to last more than 10 years, relying on a community to keep passing along that knowledge and being responsible is unlikely to be sustainable. So we really have to think about what are the government structures, what are all of the institutions that exist currently in that country, and that might include vocational schools and training students, or the private sector and how you can get them involved in that. But we have to think about that from a much more kind of like sustainable, holistic approach, and that usually is getting governments involved, making sure that they are committed to the actual ownership of the bridges and the long-term maintenance of them.
I see Christina has answered Anne-Marie's question in the chat field. Anne-Marie, if you have a follow-up question, you're welcome to unmute yourself and share. I see that you've also asked if they could elaborate, both organizations on big audacious goal to achieve by 2030. What is it?
Yeah, I mentioned for World Bicycle Week, we're looking over the next several years to get to 1 million bicycles in total. That's a lot of bicycles if you line them up side by side. But that is just a drop in the bucket, right? There's so much more that needs to be done. So I think when we think of the billion that needs to be served, we think about, yes, how do we change the market systems? How do we really inspire development agencies, governments, impact investors to really take seriously rural exclusion and make sure that they're improving and investing in improving rural access, either through bridges, through bicycles, and thinking about that as they do that program design and investments.
And on our end, when we think about our big audacious goal of, how do we sunset this organization? How do we solve the problem? And that's really what our entire strategy is formed around, is that, we can't scale to build from 10 bridges a year to 20 to 50 to 100. We're really going to have to make a lot of noise about this, have so much irrefutable evidence around the work that we're doing, advocate and shout about that from the hilltops, and then help, whether it's a government agency, a not-for-profit, a development agency, a private sector, anyone in the world who wants to build a bridge, we will help you do that, whether that's with advisory services, engineers, or with raw materials. We really want to be that catalyst for building more bridges. And we think if we do all of those things, then we'll be able to solve for, maybe not the 1 billion people who are living in rural isolation, but at least the 250 million people around the world whose rural isolation can be solved with a simple trail bridge.
Felicity also had a question in the chat field. Felicity, do you want to share the question yourself? If not, I can share it for you.
I can do that. And it was more a comment actually and a reflection, which I know Christina has picked up in response, that it really struck me as we were hearing the presentations, there was such strong kind of structural, statistical kind of evidence about the impact of rural inequalities. And it also struck me how rarely I hear that language in, say, how a healthcare organization is talking about its work or about the need to increase access to education. So it's more a reflection back about how, I guess, we can all support what is, I think, a really necessary and important resetting of that. So we don't just see the kind of rural setting as a context that's given just to work within and around, but actually something that's part of the solution and reframing it in that way.
Thank you for that comment, Felicity.
Yeah, I think, Felicity, you've just really hit one of the most important parts of when we think about one of the main things that this Route Coalition can do, which is raise that awareness, of these really important statistics, in fact, and what is in reality actually happening with a lot of these rural access interventions. And I think we get the exact same response from a lot of people when they hear those. It's like, wow, I can't believe I didn't know that. And I think one of the things that a Route Coalition, what a systems change kind of coalition can do is say, how do we translate those messages better? And how do we package them in a way that audience is really going to be able to absorb them and work with them? And we see that a lot with, again, the governments we work with. What is it that they're really prioritizing? Can we talk about the agriculture benefits, which I don't even think we've really gotten in much with today, but they are huge as it relates to kind of both of our interventions here today. And so that's really something that we're pushing for, and something that I think, again, a coalition effort can really think about. Who are the experts on the evidence side, but who are also the expert on the communication side of that? How can we bring those folks together to really create those messages and put them out there?
Thank you, Christina. I hope we covered most of the questions in the chat box. If I haven't, we still have time for one, and please unmute yourself and then we'll let you speak. We still have 3 minutes before we end the session. A question to you all. What are the organizations you want to work with in that coalition? So who do you see and who needs to be part of that coalition so you can move forward and elevate people out of poverty and raise more awareness bring that awareness to people's desks, so they know that we should not follow the SDGs goals as they are, but there's much more behind.
Absolutely. And I think the answer is kind of everyone, but just to kind of name those particular kind of groups of stakeholders that are really important. So obviously the NGO space is important. Folks like Bridges to Prosperity, World Bicycle Relief, Helvetas is huge in this arena of rural access and those based working on programs around rural access, but also again, those NGOs, those sectors that are working on health, education, as we mentioned, agriculture, everything involved in that. Importantly is very much on the kind of financing and funding side of this. So that's including World Bank, USAID, African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank. How do we get those folks involved with this type of work and get them involved with, again, how to really resource this area? Governments, huge. How do we see what their priorities are? How can we talk about rural access and the importance of it? Vocational schools, education institutions, research organizations, anybody who is really passionate about rural access is definitely kind of part of this coalition. So I hope that answers some questions. I hope that if you really see yourself in that, again, you'll reach out to us about it.
Thank you very much, Christina. Sisi from Uganda just mentioned, just maybe the one last point, that she didn't hear of these programs, and she's suggesting that there should be more in media, like radios, television, and yeah, a lot more outreach in the internet.
No, just to address that, Deborah, I'm excited to share with Sisi and some of the other people that are from Uganda that happy to announce that World Bicycle Relief will be launching into Uganda in 2023. So just spending time there this last June, just was amazed by whether the need is for quality bicycles, access, transportation. So we're really excited to be launching our programs there this next year.
Wonderful. That's wonderful news to close with. I want to thank our amazing speakers, Dave, Nivi, and Christina, for that extremely insightful presentation and bringing this issue to our Impact for Breakfast session. And I want to thank the team as well behind Dave, Christina, and Nivi for helping organizing that session. I will, as I said earlier, share that recording with all of you. Please share it with anyone you know in the network that might be even interested in the topic, or if you know an organization, just please follow up with them, share it. I'll share the speaker's contact details. You can follow up with them if you have questions and like to jump on a phone call to share what you have to share. Thank you, everybody, for being part of that session today. And I very much look forward to see you another time at another Impact for Breakfast session. And I wish you all a wonderful day ahead. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Thank you.